Hello, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. This is Mike Cobb from ECI Development. Happy to be with you this evening to talk about second residencies and second citizenships around the world. We're very fortunate to have Mr. Joel Nagel with us. Joel and I go way back, about 40 years, I guess, something like that. Anyway, back to our college days. We were best friends in college and business partners, and he just does a tremendous job of helping folks identify the best second residency, second citizenship for them. We had him on a few months ago now, right, Joel? Maybe a couple months ago, you were talking about asset protection. You were talking about ways to really protect the assets from all kinds of different ways that people can have their assets taken or drift away or flittered away over the time. And I know that's been a big part of your business practice over the last 40 years as a tax and asset protection attorney. But one of the other things that you've really specialized in and done a tremendous job of is helping folks identify a second residency or a second citizenship that's really a tremendous fit for them. And I always like to point out that you eat your own cooking. I don't actually know how many citizenships you have or residencies you have. You'll have to enlighten us on that, but you definitely eat your own cooking. You're out there procuring and securing residencies and citizenships for you, your family, and it's just absolutely incredible what you've been able to do for yourself, first of all, but then also for folks who have reached out to you. So without further ado, Joel, I'm going to hand it over to you. But the first, wait, and by the way, we have a Q&A at the end, and there's a button at the bottom where you can actually put in your questions. Joel will go through a very comprehensive presentation. We're going to save the questions till the end. Many of the questions that you might have, he will answer throughout the presentation. But any questions we have at the end, we'll get to those. And Joel will stick around till top of the hour. We're gonna call this a 1-hour webinar, so we'll have plenty of time for presentation and Q&A at the end. And so, Joel, but I would like to start with a question. I guess I get the prerogative of being the host and MC to get a first question in. How many residencies and how many citizenships do you have? And then we'll turn it over to the PowerPoint. And Diego, take it away.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Mike. Good evening from Vienna, Austria. It's 11 o'clock here, and it's just recently gotten dark, even though it's so late. It's very summertime here, so we have very long days. But it's nice to be with you. And yes, we've been best friends for 40 years, and it's nice to join you again on this program. I guess I need to answer your question first, since you have the prerogative of asking that question.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's something I view as a form of personal freedom. I have citizenship through investment. I have citizenship through ancestry. Born a U.S. citizen. I've acquired, I think in total we have 6 citizenships and residencies. And you're right, we're always working on more, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why people want to have different citizenships and the benefits for having residence and citizenship abroad. But thanks again for having me. It's always my pleasure to talk about second residency and citizenships. And this is a very high level sort of 101 presentation. If you have specific questions, we don't get to them, you can always email me. I think we have the contact information at the end. And we also do several, more advanced programs in this area or in specific regions like the Caribbean or the Middle East or Europe. It depends on the part of the world where you'd like to be. So, Diego, go ahead and advance the slide, please. All right, one more, please. All right, so, when we talk about multiple citizenship, some people think that, this is some new concept. In some ways, it is new. I mean, I can tell you that in giving presentations about asset protection for the last 35 years as a lawyer, there would be maybe 1 or 2 people that would come up to me after a presentation and they'd want to talk about this topic. It was generally sort of the squirrely person in the back of the room that nobody else wanted to talk to that was interested in this topic. But we've seen over time, more and more people have become interested in it. And now, when we talk about asset protection or I speak at conferences, I would say it's more like 3/4 of the people in the audience either have a citizenship or residence somewhere else, or they're in the process, or they're very interested. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we'll touch on those in the presentation. So some of the developments are new. One of my good friends, Christian Kalin, he's a partner with the firm Henley and Partners. It's the largest citizenship company in the world, based in the UK. He's in Zurich, Switzerland. He's been dubbed the godfather of this industry. And I was joking with him one day, and I said, wow, you must be 2,000 years old. And he said, well, what are you talking about? He helped develop one of the more recent programs in the late 80s in Nevis St. Kitts. It's really the poster program in the Caribbean. Most of the other Caribbean countries have followed the Nevis St. Kitts program, but it's been around, I don't know, 40 plus years. And he said, well, why do you say 2,000 years? And I said, well, because if for any people in the program who have a Christian orientation, if you read in the New Testament chapter of Acts, it's actually Acts 22:22, which is easy for me to remember. The Apostle Paul has been giving a speech that incites the crowd, and he gets the crowd all worked up, talking about Jesus and the resurrection. And the crowd actually orders him to be stoned to death. And the Roman centurion guards come and actually take him away, and they don't know what to do with him, really. And so the senior Roman officer orders that he be tied to a pole and flogged. And the Apostle Paul asks a very interesting question. He says to the centurion, he said, is it legal for you to whip a Roman citizen who hasn't ever even been charged with a crime? And the Roman soldier says, you're a Roman citizen? Because obviously they're in Jerusalem. And he says, yes, I was born in the province of Taurus. And that was a Roman province. My father was Roman, I'm Roman. And the soldier replies, I had to pay a lot of money for myself to become a citizen of Rome. And so, it drives home the point that 2,000 years ago, the same concept was out there at the time. The world superpower was Rome. People wanted to become Roman. Now, the undisputed superpower is America, the US, and you see people coming from all over the world, both legally and illegally, to become American. And we have a huge inbound immigration program. We work with people, coming from all over the world who want to become American. But just because you're American doesn't mean that you don't also want to look at the advantages to obtaining a second citizenship, whether it's, through the various processes that we're going to talk about today. So let's advance the slide, please, Diego. I'm going to talk a little bit about the various residency programs, and then I'll talk a little bit about the citizenship programs. I'm going to jump around a lot. Again, there's no real rhyme or reason. Sometimes when I'm at a program, I talk about just one country. But in this presentation, Mike asked me to kind of do an overview. If you don't see the country you're interested in, it doesn't mean that the country doesn't have a program. Almost all countries have some type of program for investors, for retirees. It's broken down into different categories, the kinds of programs that are out there, how you go about it. It depends on what the country is offering, what they're attracting, what they want in return. And quite honestly, the reason why I'm speaking on a podcast sponsored by a real estate company like ECI is residence and citizenship frequently goes hand in hand with real estate. It's easy for a country to quantify what it is that they want a foreign investor to do. You pay X amount of dollars to buy a house, a condo, or make a business investment in, let's say, a business that hires employees or what have you. And if you do whatever the quid pro quo is, then the country is going to turn around and either give you residence or citizenship. So we're going to talk about those two paths. But maybe before I jump into those two paths, I should just back up and say there's one other way to get citizenship. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but it's important for a lot of people, particularly people, say my age, from 50s to 70s. It tends to be more for older folks. And that's citizenship based on ancestry. If your parents or grandparents migrated to the United States from another country, primarily the European countries like Germany, the UK, France, Italy, Spain, if you're within 2 generations, sometimes it's a third generation. Some countries like Italy, for example, allow a third generation. Most countries, Germany, France, the UK, Austria, it's 2 generations. But if you can connect the dots and show, hey, my grandfather migrated to the US, had my mother had me, and you can connect those dots backwards, that's really one of the fastest, easiest, and cheapest ways to get citizenship by ancestry. When people have an Irish grandfather, a German mother, a British, grandfather, whatever it is, that's when the ancestry programs come into play. With those kinds of programs, this is the last thing I'll say about ancestral citizenship. What you're really saying is, I am entitled to citizenship through my ancestry. I'm not starting a process as a foreigner to apply to become a citizen, but rather I am a citizen. I've always been a citizen. I'm entitled to citizenship. It's just never been recognized. So that's a little bit of a different process. If it applies to you, great. You won the birth lottery, and you have a lot of options available to you to get that citizenship. Most countries, it can take up to 2 years based on the bureaucracy. Mike was talking about my citizenship. I've used those processes to go back and get British citizenship and German citizenship based on, again, on my ancestry. But this program is really for everybody else, right? If you have that ancestral option, take it. It's great. There's no reason you wouldn't take it. And if you need help with that, reach out to our firm. We can certainly help you with that. If that doesn't apply to you because your ancestors came 3, 4, 5 generations ago or longer, or you came from a country where they don't have the ability to get ancestral citizenship or something like that, or you're just not able to connect the dots to your parent, your grandparent, then you have to think about the other ways to get residency and citizenship. And what we're primarily going to talk about are citizenship through investment, residency through investment. Sometimes they're referred to as golden visas, retirement visas, and citizenship by investment. Those are really the types of terminology that are used in this area. So we're going to jump in. We're going to talk a little bit about the specific programs, just touch on them here. The first country we have listed is Belize. It's a country that I do a lot of work in. I love Belize. Spent many, many years there in my life and career. I am Belizean citizen, so I'm not completely objective, but they have a very good residence program based on investment. And the investment is a minimum of $250,000 into various sectors, primarily the tourism sector. So ECI, for example, I'm sure if you're on this webinar, you're familiar with ECI and its products. ECI is building a Marriott hotel and residence product in Belize, and each of those units that it has for sale are eligible for the investor to get residence based on that investment. And that is primarily what we see in a lot of these countries. And it's also what a lot of developers like ECI look for when they're going to do a project, when they're thinking about price points, what is it they want to build. Frequently, the residence or citizenship requirements play a role. So for example, I don't know the ECI price points off the top of my head, but I believe that the least expensive units start in the low $300,000 range, and the citizenship or residence by investment program in Belize requires a minimum of $250,000. So by definition, any Marriott unit that you would decide you want to buy, it would allow you simultaneously to apply for residence. And then over time, that residence can lead to citizenship. The nice thing about these types of programs for investors is generally when you make that investment, it eliminates the time requirements. That's a very important concept because if you decide, for example, hey, I just want to move to Belize, I want to get a job there, I want to become a resident, there are different hoops and hurdles you can jump through, and you make no investment at all. But the quid pro quo is you have to live there almost uninterruptedly for a long period of time. It must be your tax residence. You must work there. You must pay taxes there. So the time element, the work element are thrown out the window when you make an investment. And I'll come back to this point with other programs. Talk about Dubai or almost all programs. What they've essentially do is minimize or eliminated the requirement that you spend time there. If you want to spend time there, great. In Belize's program, you could spend 365 days a year there. But the other beautiful thing is you can also spend zero. And that's what a foreign investor wants. They want the ability to be there as much or as little time as they want, right? They're making an investment. Then they get their residence. And then after a period of time, they can convert that residence to citizenship. So that's Belize in a nutshell. Let's go to the next slide, please. Panama. Now, Panama is an interesting country. They had a very, very inexpensive program called the Friendly Nations Visa. The program is still called the Friendly Nations Visa, but they've recently brought the investment requirement also up to $250,000. So before it was less than that. Now it's harmonized with Belize and Costa Rica and a couple of the other Central American countries. But the Friendly Nation Visa is only open to certain countries. Can't remember exactly how many. I want to say 50 some countries. If you're from those countries, you can very easily apply. You make your investment. Doesn't have to be into tourism, it can be other things. Again, I know ECI has a tremendous program involving teak. So you have teak hardwoods, you can make an investment in a forestry investment that has long-term appreciation, capital gains over time. But in the meantime, you get to enjoy your residency immediately. Now, Panama, people will tell you that after 5 years that you are eligible for citizenship. That's a true statement. However, Panama is a country that does not permit dual citizenship. And now I know somebody's going to call and tell me, well, I was able to do it and they don't enforce that rule, blah, blah, blah. I get it, but I'm a lawyer. I'm here to tell you what the law is. The law in Panama is that dual citizenship doesn't exist, which means you can go through the process, you can get your Panamanian citizenship, but at the moment you get Panamanian citizenship, you are required to renounce the citizenship where you came from. Now, the thing about this concept, the US is kind of in the middle. Up until 1975, the US did not recognize dual citizenship. After 1975, they said, okay, we'll recognize dual, tri, multi citizenship for people, but only if the country where they get the dual citizenship also has that same reciprocal concept. So for example, the last program we talked about was Belize. Belize allows for dual citizenship. You have very, very many Belizeans who live in the US, they've become American. You have Americans that live in Belize, they become Belizean, but they don't have to give up their home, their birth citizenship. Panama, it's not that way. But having said that, many, many people are very, very satisfied to get the Friendly Nation visa. And that's as far as it goes. They don't ever really apply for citizenship. They're not trying to become Panamanian. They don't need a Panamanian passport. They just want the Panamanian version of a green card, which basically allows them to come, stay as long as they want, stay as little as they want when they make an investment, in something like TEEK, and then they're good to go. They don't have to, they don't have to worry if they, Mike always talks about Plan B. If there's an issue or problem in the world, whether it's COVID, I've had clients in the last year, they've been worried about nuclear fallout. If Russia and the US or China, gets into nuclear exchanges, and, where we'll be safe, who knows what the answer to that is. But, the idea is that maybe Latin America will be safer. And you don't need citizenship to go there. You just need a residence card. So the Panamanian program does that. All right, let's move on to the next slide, please. All right, Uruguay. Probably won't talk a lot about Uruguay. A lot of people call it the Switzerland of South America. I love Uruguay. I have a lot of friends there, and it's a very low tax jurisdiction, which is, from a structural perspective, why a lot of people set up companies and foundations and things like that there. But they do also have a investor residency program. You can also, interestingly, Uruguay, as far as I know, but people could correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm certainly not, wouldn't say my knowledge is exhaustive on this point, but it's the only country I know where when you get residence, you can also are eligible to get a passport. You don't actually have to go through the citizenship process to get an Uruguayan passport. You just have to have a residence card. So a lot of people like Uruguay for that reason. Also, people who maybe want to live in a higher tax country like Argentina or Brazil like setting up their residence in Uruguay. Next slide, please. All right, then we have, what do we have here? We have residency and citizenship by investment. And there's a number of countries here. I'll just go through them quickly. Austria, which is where I am now, they have an interesting program. I mean, first of all, most European countries, I won't say easy because there's bureaucracy involved, but it's relatively easy to get residence. There's various ways you can do that. You can get a job, you can start a company and hire yourself. In some countries, you can be a retiree, but some of those programs don't really lead to citizenship. But if you do want citizenship, you have to observe the rules. You have to look at whether, you can get dual citizenship. Austria is one of those countries that doesn't generally allow dual citizenship, but they have exceptions for what's called extraordinary contribution. So if you're, a downhill skier and you're going to win the gold medal for Austria, they'll let you become a citizen, or you're a scientist or a musician, or you own a sports team. There's a lot of ways that you can get citizenship there. And if you have an extraordinary talent or able to make a huge investment that would have an impact, there's no exact amounts, but my friends, my lawyer friends tell me that it's generally accepted that if you invest about 7 million euros, which is right now about $8 million, that's sufficient to qualify you for this type of citizenship. Belgium has an interesting program. It's a little bit shorter than other countries in going from residence to citizenship. Most countries are 5 years. Belgium, you can work through the process in 3 years. So it makes it interesting. Next slide, please. All right, Malta. Now, Malta is generally considered to be one of the absolutely best citizenship by investment programs in the world. The passport is considered in the top 3 or 4 passports in the world as to where you can travel visa-free, which is how countries are ranked. I mentioned Henley and Partners. They do an annual survey every year, and they rank and identify the top passport in the world. I believe last year it was Japan. Japan actively uses their foreign aid and foreign investment to require countries to not put any kind of visa requirement on Japanese citizens. So the Japanese passport is considered very good, but it's also almost an impossible passport to get. After Japan, Germany, again, if you have ancestral ties, great. If not, it's a hard passport to get. Then quickly you come to Malta. Malta has a citizenship by investment program. It's not cheap. Some people say it's not even an investment program. It's a donation program, really. And again, there's two categories. You have the residency part where you could invest a smaller amount. I believe right now it's 350,000 euros. So about a little over $400,000. You can buy real estate and that will get you a residence permit. Then, you have to spend a dedicated amount of time in Malta to maintain your residence. The citizenship program, you are basically making a donation. They call it an investment, but it's really a donation into the sovereign fund of Malta. They do not spend that principal. They only spend the income on on that fund, much like other sovereign funds for roads and bridges and schools. So you're making an investment as a citizen in the country. You're gonna be out about $1 million right now based on the exchange rate when it's all said and done. You will not get anything back, but you will have one of the most coveted passports in the world. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to talk just for a minute about Canada. People are going to say, Canada, how did Canada make the list? Canada is an interesting place. Canada is a country that actually has higher taxes than the US. So people would say, well, Joel, why would anybody leave the US and go to Canada to pay more taxes? That's a great and a fair question. But Canada, like most European countries, the tax system is not based on the fact you're Canadian. So it's not based on citizenship like the US. Incidentally, the US bases its tax system on citizenship, and the Roman, going back 2,000 years ago, we talked about sort of biblical times with regard to citizenship, but the concept of taxation based on citizenship is also a Roman concept, which almost virtually no other country in the world has ever followed except the United States. The idea is, hey, you're an American, regardless of where you live, you have an American passport, the American government's there for you, the American military is going to come and save you if something happens to you, and therefore you pay taxes on your worldwide income. Most other countries, it's not that way. The tax system is based on your residence, which means if you live in the country, you will pay the appropriate tax. If you don't live in the country, you don't pay any tax. And Canada fits that mold. So the idea with the Canadian residence and then citizenship over time is to become Canadian for people who really truly want to expatriate and give up their US citizenship. Again, most people do not do that. Most people get a second citizenship and they keep the first citizenship. When you hear the word expatriation, that word's used a lot, by the way, and the shorter version, expat, is thrown around a lot to mean people who just live in another country, right? But the true legal term expatriation or expatriate is somebody who not only lives in another country but has given up the citizenship of their home country. Now in the US, maybe about 10,000 people a year actually go through that process. And with millions of people coming in every year, we're not going to run out of people anytime soon, except that the 10,000 people who leave generally have enormous means. And so, it's not only the money and the taxes, it's the entrepreneurial talent. When I look at the people that I work with and see that expatriate, it's an A list of people, CEOs, people who can make decisions about where companies are going to be located, where jobs are going to be had. So some of these people go through the process becoming Canadian. They pay a little bit more tax in the beginning to where they get their Canadian citizenship. They expatriate from the United States, meaning no more US tax. Then they move outside of Canada, meaning they have, again, the Canadian passport is the top 5 passport in the world. It's very highly coveted. And so they have a top 5 passport. They can, travel not only to Canada, but, up until recently, with some of the new border rules and restrictions under NAFTA, the treaty between the United States and Canada, Canadians are guaranteed free access to the United States. So the feeling was, hey, if I get a Canadian passport and expatriate, I can always come back to the US as long as I don't live more than 182 days a year in the US, then, I'm good to go. I'm not going to pay US tax. If I don't live in Canada, I'm not going to pay Canadian tax, and I'm going to travel the world on a Canadian passport. So that's kind of the strategy and the theory there. Now, Cyprus, they had a program very similar to Malta's, but a few years ago, due to fraud and corruption, and the EU basically clamped down on them for the way that some pretty shady people were ending up with Cypriot passports, and so they did away with the citizenship program, but they still have the residence program. And I've been to Cyprus many times. It's a beautiful place. It's I would call it English speaking Greece with British rules and administration. So if English speaking Greece is what you want, with virtually 330 days a year of sunshine, and relatively moderate costs compared to other certainly other Mediterranean places you might live. I think there's a lot to be said for that. You can get a residence card, and it's also then very easy to move around throughout the EU. All right, next slide, please. We have Jersey, which is one of the Channel Islands. A lot's been said in the last couple of years about the UK and Brexit, and we probably don't have time to get into all that right now. But the Channel Islands in general are still considered places where people want to get residence and then eventually get citizenship through the back door into the UK. Hong Kong, obviously, it's being pulled more and more closely into mainland China, but it's still, for residency purposes, it's still sought after in Asia, although a couple of the other places we're going to talk about in a minute, primarily Singapore, are rapidly overtaking Hong Kong as like the go-to destination. Next slide, please. Sorry, my screen's so small here. I have to look in at it. Monaco, one of the smallest little postage stamp countries in the world. It's basically just a little harbor and a mountain that comes down to the sea, tucked into France. It's got France around it. It's a stone's throw from Italy, but historically it's been its own independent country, and it's highly sought after, particularly for Europeans, if there are Europeans on the call, because again, the European tax system is based on residency. So if you go to Monaco, you don't even have to become a citizen. You just become a Montagues, I think is the right way of saying that. Basically a citizen, a resident from Monaco, a Montaguean. And, basically if you come from a high tax country like Germany or France, and you move there, your tax rate goes from maybe 70% to zero. So it has huge, huge, huge implications. Obviously it's opens the door to people who say they live there and they don't really live there, because again, Monaco's inside France. There's not really any borders. But with technology and AI, cell phones, and I've heard more and more cases where high tax countries like France and Germany, Italy, Spain have brought legal action against people who claim Monaco as their residence, but they really live, in those high tax countries. It's very, very difficult to get a citizenship in Monaco, but residence is available. You actually don't even have to buy property in Monaco. You essentially have to open a bank account and put €500,000, which is right now about $565,000 into a bank account. Basically let it sit there and you'll get your residence, you'll get some interest on the money as well. So it's for somebody who wants a European residence, it's a pretty good idea. Now, New Zealand was really thrust into the forefront during COVID because they had, I think, the harshest rules that, they basically didn't let anybody in the country who wasn't from New Zealand. And then you started seeing all these articles in these various magazines and newspapers about the jet setters, the billionaires from the US who are all making their way to New Zealand. Well, why were they doing that? New Zealand it's a very low density country, but it's still a first world country. It's English speaking. It has great natural resources. It has, a very highly advanced medical system. And for all those reasons, a lot of the billionaires were building their bunkers and what have you. New Zealand has several programs that are generally they have a point system based on your education, your investment, your marital status, your children. The younger and healthier and smarter and more degrees you have or more money you have, it's going to be easier. And if you don't have any of those things, it's going to be harder and harder. And when you get to be my age or older, particularly into your 60s, it's going to become very difficult or impossible if you don't have massive resources. Other countries particularly countries that have a nationalized type health system or a two-tiered system where everybody has universal health care coverage at the lowest level. They will not allow people to become residents after a certain age because the argument goes that they have not paid into that social system. So they don't want you to move to New Zealand as a 65-year-old to retire, and then immediately you need a lot of health. You have a lot of health problems. You need a lot of hospitalization and doctors, which are largely subsidized and in many cases free. And they don't want you to be able to do that. So, if you're thinking about a country like not only New Zealand, Austria, where I live is the same way. One of the things you can do is before you reach that age, you can generally buy a supplemental insurance. Here in Austria, it's not that bad. I don't know, maybe it's like $120 a month or something like that. You can buy that coverage, and then it brings you into that national system. You can buy a second tier coverage on top of that for private rooms and longer stays, better doctors, whatever. But you have to start doing that before a specific period of time. So it's something I think to check out, particularly in the European countries and the developed countries that have a social health system. You probably want to check that point because you don't want it to be a barrier to being able to go there later. So even if you're not planning on retiring for 2 or 3 or 4 years, it might behoove you to actually look at it and get insurance while you still can, while you can afford it, and while you're still able to buy it. And that will keep the door open for you later. Next slide, please. All right, Singapore I mentioned. To me, Singapore is a rock star. It's just booming. Every time I'm there, I'm just amazed that basically the whole country is a city, and there's one little like 20-acre farm on the northern border that the government has built and developed so that school children can go and see, what farm animals look like and where chicken eggs come from, because most people in Singapore just think everything shows up on a container ship, which it does. But Singapore has surpassed virtually all other countries in the world in terms of its modernization, its education system, its health system. It has a very low tax system. I think the maximum corporate rate is about 16%. So a lot of people are interested in Singapore. Again, it's a place where it's not too hard to get residence. It's very, very hard to get citizenship, or impossible. And they're also a country, unless it's bestowed on you for some major thing that you've done for the country. If you would qualify for citizenship, you would have to give up any other citizenship that you have. Switzerland, Switzerland is an amazing place. Spent a lot of time in Switzerland. It's sort of Cadillac tax haven that's been around for many years. It used to be really impossible for a foreigner to get residence or citizenship. I would say over time that door has opened more and more, particularly to residency. Although if you become a Swiss resident, then after 12 years, so it's a long period, but after 12 years, you can apply for citizenship. The other thing I just mentioned about Switzerland, which is interesting, is if you want to become a resident there, because again, the European tax system is based on residence and not citizenship. You can actually go and say, hey, I want to become a resident of Switzerland. I'm buying property there. They'll want to know whether you would like to become a citizen someday or not. That's kind of a secondary issue. But if you want to become a resident, you can actually negotiate a flat tax rate that you will pay for so many years. And that's a fascinating concept. You sit down and say, well, this is how much money I've earned the last 10 years, and I pay X amount of tax in this country or that country. And if you let me come here, I'm going to offer to pay, instead of $1 million a year, I'll pay you $200,000 a year. And for Switzerland, if they take the deal, they get free money. And if they don't take the deal, they don't get the resident. So in many cases, they take the deal. And the town of Gstaad in Switzerland, in the mountains, the beautiful, picturesque little town, a couple thousand people, has the highest per capita rate of billionaires in the world. Why? Because it's worth it for other Europeans, particularly more so than Americans, because an American's not going to get rid of their tax obligations by moving to Switzerland unless they expatriate. But for a German billionaire, a French billionaire, an Austrian billionaire, an Italian billionaire, a Spanish billionaire, hey, why not move to Switzerland? Over time, if you want, you can get a Swiss passport. And in the meantime, you get a Swiss residence card, you negotiate a tax rate, and you pay the Swiss government some small amount of money. They're happy to get the money. And you're basically wiping out that tax obligation in the high tax country you come from. Now, of course, these other countries don't like that. The UK, for example, is threatening a worldwide tax system like the US. I don't know if that will actually ever, pass and become law, but they're at least talking about it. And there's some grumblings about that in other countries too. We'll see, but for now, it's still a option for people who want to try and minimize their tax in conjunction with their residence, which is a very common concept. The investment part, I mentioned at the beginning, real estate part, tax part, residence part, citizenship part, they all pretty much hang together. And so countries understand that they're competing. At the beginning, Mike was asking me about the various residence and citizenships I have. Obviously, I'm in this industry, so it makes sense. I have, family and cultural ties with countries, and it makes me feel good to be able to have citizenship or residency in those countries. And I'm not actively looking to expatriate from the US, but if I ever needed or wanted to do that, I have that option. One interesting thing about that is under US law, you cannot expatriate and therefore become a stateless person. So if you only have one citizenship, you cannot go and say, I'm giving up my US citizenship. I go to conferences sometimes and people will say, oh, I'm a citizen of the world. I don't recognize US citizenship, blah, blah, blah. That's all BS. Forget about it. The only way you're going to give up your US citizenship and avoid the US tax net is by first having another citizenship. And in many cases, before you can get the citizenship, you have to start with a residence. So you have to have a plan. You have to work your plan. Maybe it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. When a client calls me and wants to talk about citizenship, the first two questions I ask are, what's your time frame and what's your budget? I tell clients all the time, look, there's slow, cheap options and there's fast, expensive options. It's a seesaw. They don't go together. As you push one side down, the other side automatically goes up. So what can you afford and how quickly do you want it done? If money's no object, we can have citizenship for a client in 6 weeks. If money's a huge object, they don't really want to spend money. Yes, there are ways to do it without an investment, but it's going to take anywhere from 5 to 12 years. And by the way, there's really truly no free lunch, because if you say I don't want to make an investment, that's fine. But then if you move to a country, by definition, you're a resident there, then you're paying tax there. And you have to be able to earn money. Otherwise, you're not going to get a residence card. So you either have to have a job or invest money, and you're going to be pumping money into the system through taxes, through rents, through mortgages, through groceries. In Europe, you have GST taxes or VAT taxes. And so, if you do that for 7 years and say, I didn't have to pay, for an investment. Okay, you can tell yourself that, but the reality is maybe it costs you even more. Some clients will tell me, well, I prefer that method. But the reality is the golden visas, the investor visas, you're buying something, you're making an investment, you're buying real estate, but you don't have to move there, which means you don't have to become a tax resident. If you want to, if it gives you a benefit, great. If you don't want to, because it's not giving you a benefit, then it's not something that you have to do. So, I like the golden visas because it gives you a lot of flexibility, how much time you want to spend somewhere, and then go from there. All right, next slide. Diego's trying to move me along there. United Kingdom, again, no longer part of the EU, but still the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world, leader in financial services, leader in technologies, many, many different technologies, and people are still flocking from all over the world to become residents and citizens of the UK, particularly English-speaking parts of the world that find it almost impossible to legally get into the U.S. Not illegally. We know that has been easier up until recently, but legal residence for a lot of English-speaking people, let's say Indians, people from not only English-speaking, but it just comes to mind the former English Commonwealth countries are going to gravitate a lot towards the UK. And one of my friends I just was talking to the other day said there's no Brits left in London. He said London is completely taken over by foreigners now. He wasn't saying it really in a disparaging way. He said actually it's very much the melting pot, people from all over the world, but it no longer has its sort of historic English character because of the inflows of immigration. And again, lots of ways to go about it. Investor visas, in my view, are the way for people that want to have the option to live there and spend time and work towards citizenship without making that huge commitment for time. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the Caribbeans. That we use the term instant citizenship. Instant, what is instant? To me, a instant citizenship program is 3 to 4 months, and that's about the fastest. St. Lucia has an expedite program. If you have a very clean background, no health issues, and you pay an expedite fee, we can get that in the 6 to 8 week time frame. Basically, you're passing a background check proving you don't have any communicable diseases, and you have lots of resources, and you're buying, going through one of the channels, whether you're buying some real estate, they have a program where you can invest in government bonds. You get the principal back at the end of the 5-year period. It's a 5-year bond. What you forego is the interest on the bond. And that's basically the cost of, that's one of the ways to manage the cost of the program. A lot of clients like that. Other clients would just rather pay a fee. You pay, for yourself and a spouse right around $150,000, a few dollars more for minor children. St. Lucia is also good in that a child and a minor child, if they're in school, even graduate school, can go, I believe it's all the way up to 30 years and still come in on the same application. And that's important because if you have an adult child and they're not in school, they can't come in on your application, and you want them to get the citizenship that you're getting, because obviously if you're stressed about what's going on in the world and you want a plan B, you probably don't want to just up and go and then leave your family behind. So St. Lucia has been good for clients who've contacted us and they have 20-something-year-old kids, maybe in graduate school or something like that, medical school, law school, and we can still include them on their application. Next slide, please. Okay, so Antigua, Barbuda, Nevis, St. Kitts, all these programs in the Caribbean are very, very similar. I mentioned that Nevis, St. Kitts was the pioneer of these types of programs. The other countries have pretty much copied them. I mentioned things like the age of dependence. They sort of compete with each other around the edges on things like that. But all these programs generally, you're paying anywhere from $100,000 to $150,000 for a direct payment, and you're paying, a couple $100,000 to Nevis now is $450,000 for an investment. If it's the payment, the money's gone. It's a smaller amount. If it's an investment, something you own and you buy. Now, some countries, and I'll be perfectly blunt, I love Nevis and St. Kitts. I spend a decent amount of time there. But one of the challenges of some of these programs is the requirement tends to drive prices. So for example, let's compare Nevis, St. Kitts with Belize. In Nevis and St. Kitts, the minimum investment is $450,000. And that means that every little teeny tiny 400 square foot glorified hotel room in Nevis that's for sale, St. Kitts that's for sale, is $450,000. The problem is there's such a glut of that product that now you get your citizenship, you decide you want to sell your little bungalow or your little hotel room, and you list it with a realtor, and you find out that that product that you paid $450,000 for, that there's a million products like that, or lots and lots and lots of it, and to sell it, you may have to discount it to $250,000, $300,000. So you're buying something that is not economically sustainable, and ultimately you're going to lose money with it. A lot of the programs that have that type of requirement, I think that's something you have to be wary of. Conversely, before I talk about Belize, just finishing up with Nevis, I had a client a few years ago. They bought a beautiful home on a promontory in St. Kitts overlooking the water, and it was several $1,000,000. Now I know people are going to say, like, Joel, hey, well, what if you don't have several $1,000,000? That's why these programs all have minimums. But if you have the resources and you can afford to sort of be away from the herd, they paid, I think, just under $3 million for their property 7 or 8 years ago, and they just sold it for almost 10. So for them, that was a really good investment. They bought something, they got their citizenship, and they sold it for 3 times more than they paid for it, more than 3 times more. So at that end, because there's the laws of supply and demand, they were able to buy the product and then sell it at a gain. If you buy the 400 square foot condo somewhere or hotel room, then it's the opposite. You have this huge glut of product, and to get rid of it, you're going to take a loss. Contrast that now with Belize. The reason I think Belize is very different on that point is, well, the Nevis law has been around, like I said, for 40 some years. Belize is brand new, and I don't honestly think people are building a glut of product to that price point. In fact, on Ambergris Caye, the main tourist island, I think that price point's actually very low, $250,000. You could find product there. I think ECI even has product there off water, like a Best Western unit or something could very well be, at that price point. But when you're on the water, you're at 3, 4, 500,000, 800,000, a million. So it's not really artificially impacting the prices. I feel like in Nevis and some of the other Caribbeans, it really is. So, you just have to figure out what your priority is. If it's a place that I'm going to buy and own and live in, then the investment part's maybe not so important. If it's something I'm going to buy as an investment so I can circumvent the residency rules and I don't have to live there, then I want to make sure that one, it's providing good return on investment while I own it. And secondly, that when I sell it, if I hold it for 3 or 5 or 10 years, I would hope that I'm going to make a gain on that product. So again, I think Belize does exceptionally well. There's other countries that I work with as well that I think you get that kind of dynamic. Mike talks about the sweet spot on the bell curve where you get appreciation on the one hand and you get income on the other. Nevis is a great place. The cost of product is pretty high. What you get for that 450 is, in my view, it's not as much value. And then when you sell it, you're going to take a loss. So you just have to kind of like, I have clients that are doing all of these programs, and I feel like my job is just to make sure they go into it with open eyes, that they kind of know what they're in for. I don't want somebody buying a little bedroom in Nevis for $450,000 with the expectation that in 2 years they're going to sell it for 800,000, because that will never, ever, ever happen. And I'm sure there might be some realtors out there that might tell them that, but the reality is I actually know a lot of realtors in Nevis, and the good ones wouldn't say that. And so you'd be talking about, hey, do you want to buy a product that's, if you sell it, there's going to be a glut, you're going to lose a little bit of money. Would you rather just make a payment to the government so you don't have to buy something? Or, do you want to buy something else? Do you want to pay more for something, that costs more than the minimum, but is probably in a better position to give you a return. Those are the types of discussions we have with clients when they're looking at these products. All right, next slide. I think we have. These are 2 countries I threw in. I just wanted to talk about a little bit. People are probably scratching their head. Joel, why are you talking about Bulgaria and Turkey? I find them to be very, very interesting countries. They sit right on the periphery of Europe. Bulgaria is in a transitionary phase into the European Union. It actually is a member. It's restricted in some ways in that if you have residence in Bulgaria, that does not give you the right to live and work anywhere in Europe. But if you have citizenship in Bulgaria, you do. So, we talked before Malta, where, you're going to invest $1 million and the investment's basically a gift to the government. You're never going to get anything back. Basically, Bulgaria said, hey, we can do the same thing. We can offer the same program, but we'll do it as a bond and you'll get your money back. You just won't get the interest. And that's a lot more palatable for clients of mine, particularly if I tell them, look, you get a Bulgarian passport, you can go live in the south of France. You can have an apartment in Paris. You can have set up an office in Berlin, Germany. It's giving you the access to the EU market. So even though historically Bulgaria might not have been first on anybody's list, by the way, Bulgaria has a lot of beautiful places. The Black Sea and anyways, I'm a big fan of Bulgaria, but I mentioned it here because it really is kind of the dark horse when it comes to Europe. Now, Turkey is similar in a lot of ways, but it's also different in some ways. It sits on the periphery of Europe, but it's not part of the EU. It has some agreements where a Turkish citizen can spend up to 180 days in the EU without a visa. So you have that. But so what's the thing about Turkey? Is it going to become part of the EU like Bulgaria? Probably not. There's historic differences, cultural differences, religious differences. I don't really think Turkey's ever going to become integrated into Europe, but Turkey is a leader in its own sphere, right? Through the various stands of the former Soviet Union. One of my clients that we recently got Turkish citizenship for was saying he really liked it because Turkey was strong enough to stand up to the United States, to stand up to Russia, to stand up to China. It kind of makes its own way in the world. And, it's true. And to a certain extent, I mean, if you get a St. Lucian passport and, the US government leans hard enough on St. Lucia is going to do anything the US tells it to do. Turkey's another case, right? I mean, it's a world power. It tries to be neutral in a lot of ways, although it's a member of NATO. So, it has a sort of a pro-Western orientation. And, like I said, Turkey's kind of the leader of the various Turkish states that are the former Soviet Union. And I think those states, a friend of mine was just telling me over the last couple of days about those states are slowly integrating into their own kind of EU type society, very similar to the EU, where there'll be more and more integration, and eventually sort of this Turkish super state that really will rival. It'll be a sort of reconstituting of the Ottoman Empire kind of thing. So we'll see. But again, the other nice thing about Turkey is it's a citizenship program. You skip residency, and the investment, I have to double check, but it's either 350 or 400,000 euros. And that makes it, for a European program, relatively inexpensive. Again, I mentioned Bulgaria and Turkey for that reason, tend to be less expensive. All right. I think I'm about out of time. I don't know. I have one or two more slides. Just let's go through them all fast. Let's just show the slides. We have Grenada and Dominica, a couple more Caribbeans. Next slide, please. We have, Moldova, Montenegro, two more peripheral European countries, very inexpensive to buy. If you're looking for the future, hey, I want something, I'm thinking 10, 15, 20 years down the road. These are great countries, beautiful countries. The feeling is you get citizenship there, and then you get the back door into Europe, because the EU will most definitely expand there in the future. Both countries are working on agreements to join the EU. So, it's a great time before they become part of the EU to get your citizenship, in the $100,000 range. And it's really, really an interesting idea. There's no guarantee as to whether or when they will become part of the EU, but I believe they will. And in the meantime, you get a passport in great countries. All right, let's keep going. Next slide. Portugal Golden Visa. There have been a lot of changes to the Portuguese Golden Visa. It's one of the residency programs that I have and my family has. It was very, very interesting, and it was straightforward. You could make an investment in real estate. They've done away with the real estate portion. The feeling was that foreign investment was pushing up the cost of real estate in a lot of markets, particularly Lisbon, Porto, the Algarve. But there are still ways that you can get it based on other types of investments that are outside of real estate. You can invest in a Portuguese startup fund. You can start your own company and hire people. If you want Portugal, it's still there for you. Next slide. All right. Well, that's my information. I don't know if Mike says we have time for a few questions, we will, but if not, there's all my information. You can certainly reach out to me, call, send an email, and I'll be happy to provide you with any more information about a specific country. I know that Mike's company, ECI, sometimes they run specials where, if you buy let's say a condo at the Marriott above a certain price point, maybe it's 500,000 or million. I don't know. Mike will have to talk more about that. It's not the lowest level ones, but it's for some of the premium units. Then ECI will take care of the cost to do the residence and citizenship. So I don't know, Mike, if you want to talk about that, but I think I'll leave it there. I see it's just went past midnight here in Vienna, which means it's a little after 6 p.m. On the East Coast.
It is. So we have a few questions. I'll just hit a couple of them. And what I'd also do is ask Diego to maybe grab them. And I see some of them came from an anonymous attendee. So that means we cannot answer your question offline. Sorry about that. But anyway, just a couple of the questions that came in. You've answered some of them already. Can a naturalized American citizen apply and obtain second citizenship without losing American citizenship, since we renounced our previous citizenship in the 70s? I'm not 100% sure what that means, but you answered it early that yes, you can have a second citizenship without renouncing your U.S. unless the country that you're getting your second citizenship in requires it. Is that a correct answer, Joel?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just throw one more thing in though. A case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, we understand all this, but there's one more element, and that is that you can't lose your U.S. citizenship by accident, and you can't lose it by mistake. You can't lose it because, let's say, you became Panamanian, and Panama says you can only be Panamanian, you can't be American. The Supreme Court has said only you as a citizen can lose your citizenship through your own voluntary act. So to give up your citizenship, you literally go into a U.S. embassy or consulate in a foreign country, because you can't expatriate from inside the U.S. So you have to be outside the U.S. You make an appointment, you go to a U.S. embassy or consulate, you sit down and you fill out a form and you sign it. And before you sign it, it says, I'm not under any, oppression. I'm not under drug, influence. I'm making this choice freely. I understand that it's, irrevocable and I can't change my mind once I've made it. There's all those statements and you're signing that. If you don't sign that, then the Supreme Court has said, we don't care what the laws of Germany or Panama are. You don't actually lose the U.S. citizenship. So it's interesting. I use those two examples, Panama and Germany, because Panama doesn't really enforce that. I mentioned that. So you can probably get away with it. Germany, on the other hand, would say, hey, we're giving you a U.S. passport. So, we're going to get in the car with you and drive down to the U.S. embassy and watch you fill out this form and sign it, because they really do enforce it, meaning you decide. You have to be one or the other. You want to be German, you can't be American. You want to be American, you can't be German, unless you come in through an exception like me, because you have an ancestral claim to Germany. They did not, through that mechanism, require me to give up U.S. citizenship. So, anyways, let's answer one or two more.
Go speed round. Okay, come on, quick answer.
All right.
Are there any? I know it's hard for you, but anyway, it's hard for me too. Are there any well-maintained 18-hole golf courses in Belize?
Boy, I wish my son John was on the line. He could probably answer that better than me. I know that I think on Key Chapel there's a 9-hole, and I believe in near I think near Belmopan there is an 18-hole. Or out in San Ignacio. Maybe there's 2.
Okay, very good. We don't know the names. Question asked, will this be sent by email? Yes, the recording of this will be sent out by email to everyone who was here or registered. I may qualify for Dutch ancestry. I'm wondering how that may conflict with my current Canadian citizenship residency, and I'm currently thinking getting a Panama residency. Any conflict there with Dutch ancestry and the Canadian citizenship?
No, Canada's like the U.S. You can have multiple, so it wouldn't interfere with it. If it's ancestral, there's no requirement that you go live there. If you were in the middle, for example, of doing your Canadian residence where you couldn't leave, that could be a problem. But in this case, to get his ancestral Dutch, he wouldn't have to live in the Netherlands. So live in Canada, get the Netherlands, get both, and then
All
decide
right.
what you want to do.
Follow up. If I was to give up my Canadian, same gentleman, give up my Canadian citizenship, would that affect my Canadian pension and drop my Canadian taxes to zero?
Well, look, there's some elements of that you'd probably need to talk to a Canadian tax expert. Canada doesn't tax you once you move outside of Canada, but the fact that the pension, if it's coming from Canada, they're probably withholding tax at the source. So you probably aren't going to avoid tax on, Canadian versions of pensions or money that you have in an RSP that you pull out. That's going to be subject, kind of like a US IRA. They're going to say, well, you never paid taxes on it when it went in. Now you have to pay taxes when it comes out.
Okay. What about the Dominican Republic and Nicaragua?
Well, they both have programs. I don't have the specifics off the top of my head. I know ECI is doing something in Nicaragua. I think the investment's maybe 35,000 to get a golden visa. It's very low, I believe, right?
Yep.
And the amount of support you have to prove, I think, is also low. At one point, it was like $600. Maybe it's a little higher now. The DR's program, I just don't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I could find that out though if you forward that along.
Yep. I didn't know if that was an anonymous person or not, but if it's not, then we will get an answer for you. I'm buying teak through ECI. Is there a difference between 2 hectares of trees and 150K US when gaining Panama residency? I don't know that I understand that question, but that came from Sean. Sean, you're listening. Let us answer that question directly back to you. Interesting question.
That's good because I didn't know the answer, so I'm glad you're going to answer
And
it.
I don't either, and I'm not sure I understand the question, but we will get you an answer, Sean. Another question. A fellow buyer of trees is traveling to Kenya next week. She has a UK and Canadian passport. Which should my best gal use? Don't you normally have to? Oh, no, you can enter another country with any passport. You just have to come home on your own, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're entering the US and you have a US passport, you have to use your US passport to enter, but you don't have to use it to leave, travel around. I don't really know what the answer would be. I guess I would check and see what the visa requirements of both countries are. Sometimes when I'm going someplace, I need a visa with this passport. I don't need a visa with that. So, I'm gonna enter that country with the passport I don't need the visa for. But yeah, when you're checking in to come home with the airline that you're going to fly back to the US, because they transmit that information to the US. Like when you're still in the foreign country, you want to use your US passport, else, you'll definitely get pulled aside and asked 100 questions if you don't do that. So,
all right.
Anyways,
we're going to send the replay to everybody. Let's see. Which country is currently the cheapest to obtain a second residency and has visa-free access to the Schengen states?
Well, remember, when you get residency, that is not a passport, except in the case, like I mentioned, with Uruguay. So having a residence somewhere doesn't give you the right to travel anywhere except to that
second
country.
Citizenship. I'm sorry. I may have said residency.
Okay. So second citizenship. Well, the Caribbeans that I mentioned that start in that kind of low $100,000 range would probably be the answer to that. And most of them allow visa-free access to the Schengen countries. So anything from St. Lucia's, Anguilla, Nevis, St. Kitts, they all have that kind of on that ranking of passports from 1 to 200. The Caribbeans are in the 30s, 40s, which is pretty good actually. Considering that Europe, US, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Australia, those are like the top 30 countries. So after that, in Japan, like the highly developed countries are the top ones. The Caribbeans are generally in the next tranche, and they do have visa-free access. Now, it is important to look, and you can Google that. You can get a specific country because frequently it's not. It's specifically there'll be a specific country that somebody want to go to frequently. And I have had clients, for example, during COVID when Europe was really shutting down. I had a client who is a executive for an oil company in Russia. Well, it was really hard for him to travel. He couldn't go. He couldn't go through Europe. He couldn't get visas, and we managed to get him a Dominica passport because Russia didn't require a visa for Dominican, and he was able then to fly on Turkish Air from DC to Istanbul and then Istanbul, Moscow. Wasn't the greatest connection, but it was the best, and made his life somewhat easier during a very difficult time. So sometimes a client will have a very specific reason that they want to get a certain passport, and it usually has to do with visa-free access for that passport to a specific country.
Last question, it's a layup for you. Can you mention any conferences in North America for those looking to hear the many different views and speakers on these subject matters before making a decision on where to move?
Well, that is a layup question.
It is. I saved it for last. It wasn't the last question, but I did save it for last, and then we'll wrap up with that.
Well, look, my firm has put on one conference a year for 29 years. This is our 29th year. It's called President's Week. It's by invitation only. We don't mass market that heck out of it. It's, people that we know, people that some of our other speakers, they get invitations, people who are serious in this field. And, the conference is about asset protection. But when you think about it, second residence and citizenship is helping you protect your most precious asset, which is yourself, right? It's giving you options. I view it, people ask me, why do you keep getting these things? I'm like, it's really more for my kids, maybe my grandkids. I want them to have, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the future is going to hold, but I want to give people options. So we address it extensively at President's Week. It'll be in November. Anybody that's interested, let us know. We'll make sure you get an invite. Generally, the save the date comes out soon. And then after Labor Day, like the big invitations go out, which is usually about 10 weeks before the event. But you can also go online, presidentsweek.com. We have a landing page. I think we have the last 3 or 4 conferences, speakers. We always have a really great keynote speaker. Last year was Tulsi Gabbard. She was great. We've had Buck Sexton. We've had Mike Cobb on as one of our big speakers.
Nobody showed up. But
anyway. Who else has been a speaker that you enjoyed at President's Week, Mike?
Harry Brown for many years.
Harry Brown, Ron Paul. He's a great
Ron Paul,
speaker.
yeah. You've really brought in some incredible headliners and keynote speakers. But and Porter Stansberry, you bring in a tremendous variety of speakers that talk everything from lifestyle to asset protection to precious metals. Some crypto speakers in the past. And then obviously, topics like freedom and liberty are widely covered as well. So it's a tremendous event. Yeah, 29 years. I think I've missed one. This will over years. So really encourage.
I can't even remember. That's how long I've known you. I can't even remember the year you missed. But
something like that. Yeah.
So we talk about this topic a lot from a 30,000 foot perspective, but we invite in people to talk about their specific country. So one of our other keynote speakers last year was Mark Brantley. He's the premier, which is basically the prime minister of Nevis. And he was a fantastic speaker. He flew on his own accord from Nevis to Miami, which is where we had it this past year, and spent a couple days with us. And not only did he present, this is one of the things I really like about our conference. It's very small on purpose, and frequently, like he did last year, the speakers, they stay around for a couple of days. They want to hear the other speakers because they find the information so useful, so strategic, cutting edge. It's really about what are we doing now? Where do we go from here? It's not like this presentation was really more of a primer to kind of expose people to the topic, but the conference itself is 4 days. We have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, cocktail parties with people the whole time. You really get to know them well, and I've had speakers tell me that they really enjoyed the attendees. So, anyways, I guess we'll have to leave it there for now. But again, if people didn't get their question answered, please reach out. We'll try to help you as best we can.
and we will circulate your email to the folks here. Everyone on or even registered will get a copy of the entire presentation. And Joel, thank you for joining us so late at night in Vienna. I know it's about midnight and a half now, so get a
It's my
good night's.
pleasure. I'm a little jet lagged, so for me, it doesn't
Yeah.
really feel like midnight.
All right. Well, get a good night's rest, and
All right.
everybody, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you
Thank
next
you.
time.
Take care, Mike.
Bye-bye.